Now let's kick off today's special program with our first session, which is on climate change, a panel session on climate change. And we've heard some of this already. Nearly half of the world's children, that's roughly 1 billion kids, live in countries which are at extreme risk of suffering the effects of climate change, which then threaten their right to an education. Crisis-affected and displaced children and youth are particularly at risk as the climate crisis often exacerbates already existing problems. In many areas, such as the Sahel region of West Africa, climate change is in fact a huge driver of conflict as communities compete for limited and scarce natural resources. So climate change in the context of emergencies and protracted crises is an issue we need to address head-on, as ECW's new strategic plan reflects this need and highlights it as a core issue moving forward. A resilient education sector, ladies and gentlemen, is an essential contributor towards climate change solutions, and investing in education is particularly important in the context of a changing climate. So, what then do we do, and how do we do it now? At the heart of it, I think you'll all agree that we must first listen to those who are affected, those we are talking about today, and that is the children and youth who are affected by these crises. So with that in mind, to open our first panel of the day on climate change, I'm pleased to welcome the voices of two young people to begin our session. Please welcome to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, Pedro from Colombia and Nafisa from Nigeria. Pedro and Nafisa. Please, a round of applause for our youth voices.
Good morning, everyone. I am Nafisa, a girl champion with Save the Children and a member of Children's Parliament in Nigeria. Today, I am going to talk about the role of education in responding to climate crisis, how climate crisis impacts our learning, schools, and communities, the role of education as a solution to climate crisis. Children are least responsible for the climate crisis, yet we bear the heaviest burden of its impact, now and in the future. Climate emergency is a child's rights crisis. Children are enduring most of the emergencies because they are at a unique stage of physical and emotional development, putting them at greater risks and times of hardship. Climate change is largely responsible for the drying up of Lake Chad Basin, where I am from, located between Borno and Yobe states in the extreme northeastern part of Nigeria, which has shrunk by more than 85% of its original size. That is why access to water is a major issue in our communities, and climate change causes rain not to fall well in some seasons, which affects farming. Parents are unable to harvest enough to sell and take good care of their children. As a result, children are unable to go to school. There is a popular saying that suffering weighs a child's face. Children are always suffering when natural disaster happens. The consequences are many for children, as they have no access to sufficient food. They are even unable to go to school because their parents cannot pay their school fees. They sleep outside when their homes are destroyed by flood. I am always very sad when I see the children of my age or younger than me hawking on the streets while I go to school. These children are supposed to be in the school, not on the streets hawking. And the children that are forced to marry early are also supposed to be in school, not on the street hawking. My call to all stakeholders, climate change and education should be the major priorities of every government. Children want decision makers to take action and create laws and policies that will help manage climate change and ensure education for every child. As a child, I can say I have no role in climate change, but we are the most vulnerable when natural disaster happens. Therefore, we call on the government and international policymakers to take effective steps in this regard. Thank you for listening.
Hamaya. Tanuri Pedro, Guayutaya, Chetai, Guajira,
Intervención en su propio idioma autóctono. It's speech in his own language.
Hola, soy Pedro y vengo de la Guajira y les traigo.
My name is Pedro. I'm coming all the way from Guajira. I'll share my message from children and Guayu peoples in my country, in Colombia, and especially in the region, the Guajira region. We are facing growing phenomena that are a result of climate change. We are facing long droughts, intense rainfalls, flooding, air pollution, soil pollution with solid residues, and water pollution. And it's leading to disease, hunger, malnutrition, and they prevent us from accessing to education and health. Children, boys and girls in Colombia, they need adequate education facilities with sanitation, power, and water. To prevent boys and girls from dropping off from school, schools need basic services, decent conditions, access to libraries and technology. My cousin is 13 years old and he cannot read. And I've heard that he has some disability, and we have to support many children because, as my cousin, they need adequate conditions for learning, and we need to improve their emotional state through education as well. Boys and girls in Colombia, we urge you to listen to these climate change events. And we all need to rethink solutions to prevent and reduce the effect of climate change, especially for the most vulnerable people, such as indigenous children. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much to our child delegates from Colombia and Nigeria, Pedro and Nafisa. An emotional appeal, as you heard there in Nafisa's voice. Children shouldn't have to be standing up here asking us to protect them. We have to move into action for the sake of our children, as you heard there. Once more, a round of applause for Pedro and Nafisa, please. Now, before we begin our discussion on what we do, I'd like to thank our partners for this session, the Geneva Global Hub for Education in Emergencies, Save the Children, and Plan International. Thank you so much to all the wonderful teams who've helped put together this event. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, climate change is a global emergency negatively affecting the rights of children and threatening their right to an education and more. So, how can we mitigate the effects of climate change on education? Our panel this morning will focus on the solutions. Each speaker will share their unique perspective on how we can address and respond to climate change's impacts on education. After our discussion, we'll hold a Q&A session with those of you here, of course, in Geneva, and those watching online around the world. Don't forget to use the online tool Pigeonhole to ask your questions. You've scanned it, the QR code already on your phone, so you should be familiar by now with how to put your questions in there, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible at the end of the session. So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me now in welcoming our distinguished panelists to the stage. We have with us the Honorable Rana Tanveer Hussain, who's the Federal Minister for Education and Professional Training in Pakistan. Please, a round of applause for the Minister. Ms. Birgitte Lange is CEO of Save the Children in Norway. We also have with us Gregorius Yoris, who's a young leader representing Youth for Education in Emergencies. And Dr. Heike Kuhn, Head of Division for Education at Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Please. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let me start with you, Minister Hussain from Pakistan. Last year, we saw floods in Pakistan devastate entire communities. And as of November, schools for more than 2 million children remain completely inaccessible after the most heaviest flooding in your country's history. Can you tell us first how these floods have affected education in Pakistan and how ECW's support through its first emergency response came in for you at this difficult time?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. First of all, I congratulate Yasmin Sharif and her team for the successful conference. The yesterday pledges are very impressive. On that, I congratulate you people. Your question is very important. You know, as you mentioned, there was a devastating flood last year, and we suffered heavily, Pakistan, my country, and especially education sector. The impact of floods on education in Pakistan has been severe. In fact, the numbers are higher than you mentioned. Recent estimates suggest that over 34,000 public education institutions have been damaged or destroyed. This is UN Source Working Group. At least 2.6 million students have been affected by the floods in various parts of Pakistan. This is also data of World Bank. World Bank suggests that as many as 1 million children may drop out and not return to the schools as a result of the flood damage to the education. During this crisis, ECW came forward with a great support, which was gratefully received through the first emergency response program in the flood-affected district in the country. A grant of $5 million was extended by ECW very quickly through September-October 2022. This enabled Pakistan and the UN to take rapid action by using ECW funds. Some 80,000 children have been targeted in Sindh, Balochistan, Punjab, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa for immediate support. In addition, ECW multi-year resilience program has also been leveraged to contribute to these support efforts. Finally, the need is still great. The total cost of loss and damage to the education is estimated to be $780 million. Of the UN's $40 million appeal for education in Pakistan, as of February 2023, 60% it has been funded so far. This is the picture after flood.
Yeah.
But I must say something,
Right.
that this is not climate change, as this is the topic today. Climate change, Pakistan has suffered because of, we contributed only 1% of gas emissions. And Pakistan is suffering because of Westerns. This is not our mistake. And my children are suffering a lot. Not because of our fault, because of developed and Western countries, industrialized countries. So if this is not our fault and my children are suffering, then the international community should come forward to support us.
Yeah, indeed. It's very important that you point out that the crisis is very often for the countries and children affected is not of their own doing. Thank you very much, Minister. Birgitte, let me come to you now. Save the Children has recently published its report, Generation Hope report, which reveals the profound effects of climate change on children's education, particularly in crisis-affected areas. What role, tell us, Birgitte, does education play in helping children and youth tackle the effects of climate change?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. As we so powerful heard from Pedro and Nafisa, the climate change is not only a threat to the future, For the world's 2.4 billion children, the climate crisis is a global emergency crisis today that is disrupting children and their education. Climate change contributes and increases and deepens the existing crisis where children are carrying the burden. And last year, Save the Children, we held our biggest ever dialogue, where we heard from more than 54,000 children around the world from 41 countries, and they told us a lot about their thoughts on climate changes and the consequences for them. Our service with the children revealed the profound effect that climate change has on children. One child from Malawi, he said, "When I was displaced, I lost my education material and my school was destroyed." And keeping children in school when there is a climate emergency, like in Pakistan and in other countries, it is critical for children, for their well-being and for their learning. Education plays such a life-saving role during climate disasters and displacement. And education is also one of the most effective solutions we have to the climate crisis. Education builds resilience, and both for children and for the communities to respond to this climate change that is happening so fast. I'm also a mother and a grandmother, so this is also personal for me. And education includes problem solving, critical thinking, adaptation, and leadership skills. As Nafisa said very clearly, the climate crisis is a child rights crisis. And while children are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis, as we saw, children are not passive victims. And we must act on the demands of Pedro and Nafisa and thousands of others and take urgent action to build what we are calling climate-smart education systems.
Birgitte, very important to point out that these children are not passive victims, as we've seen. And I want to bring in someone who's been very active now, Yoris, who's a member of the Youth for Education in Emergencies panel. You're representing, Yoris, young people working at the local level. Just in a few words, tell us first how young people and grassroots organizations are taking leadership in climate policy making.
Thank you very much, Moderator, and thank you everyone for having me. My name is Yoris, and I represent Indonesia on the Youth for Education in Emergencies Global Youth Panel. 1 year ago until now, we have been advocating for youth for education in emergencies from local, national, and global levels. And one of our concerns is about climate-induced disasters and its impact on education. Ladies and gentlemen, my country, Indonesia, has a significant number of young people. We have more than 45 young people in our country. And it's a huge number. And how young people can engage on the youth and the climate policy making, it's an important thing. Ladies and gentlemen, in Indonesia, when we talk about climate policy making, we have a bunch of regulations and climate policy in our country, but apparently we are not fully involved in the whole process of policy making. We are only involved on like the implementation or like an FGD as a participant of a webinar or seminars, but we are not involved on the whole thing when the process of policy making is beginning and discussion process, implementation process, and until even in the monitoring and evaluation process. So, I want to call to the world leaders how to engage the youth to fully participate on the climate policymaking. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if we talk about climate policymaking to be more sustainable, we have to put children and youth at the forefront. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you a little bit story from my experience. So, I have faced, in my community, we have faced several disasters by natural hazards. And a bunch of disasters that create in community, they left child and youth behind. Mm-hmm. And I want to call to world leaders that we, the young people, are not inherit the future, but we own the present for our own better future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yoris. They have to be involved in policy making as well. Thank you. Dr. Kuhn, let me come to you now. Germany, of course, is the leading donor to ECW. We saw that yesterday again, setting an example to the rest of the world with its investment. Now, in your government's new strategic plan 2023-2026, climate change plays a central role, of course. So how does Germany's investment in ECW help deliver your own government's objectives on climate change?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here and asking me these questions. And first of all, as the head of education in the federal ministry, I would like to comment on the strategic plan. We pushed for it, having climate really as a central aspect, and we are so happy, but because we know this is so important, we don't have to add what has been the previous speakers, but I would also say in the beginning of our speech a personal note. When we were working on the strategic plan, I was also not under shock, but in my region, the federal ministries in Bonn and Berlin, we had these devastating floods in the near region, just 15 kilometers from Bonn. So this is, we have seen what it means, floods, everything going, people dying. So climate change, the previous speakers alluded it so well, with weather-related disasters are growing. But who is affected? The young people. We've heard this. And therefore, we need three things from our point of view. First, climate-resilient schools. Second, climate-resilient teachers. And third, climate-resilient students. So what do I mean? Starting with the climate-resilient schools, we have heard this. Could also say climate-smart schools. They have already, in times when no crisis is, we need access to water, to sanitations. They have to be stay in safe. They have to be built, or they have to stay in safe places, for example, in higher levels. And this is so important if a disaster comes. And for the good times, also equip them with solar panels to get the energy, or have generators. Second, on the climate-resilient teachers, we must not forget about the teachers. They have to be also the change agents. They have to have the educations, and they must reflect climate change into the curricula. We have to think about it, because they act as role models for the young people, and they have to teach the children to use resources in a sustainable way, like water, energy, and to really show this from an early age, and avoiding, for instance, plastic, as it harms the environment. We all know this. And third, to the climate-resilient students. We just heard Yoris telling, children must be taught how to behave in extreme weather conditions or with earthquakes, but they must also be informed. You just told us, and we must especially think about the most vulnerable children. We just heard the previous young persons, the children in your areas, indigenous peoples. So the floodings in Pakistan, we were still under the impression, this is very important, and at a higher age, let us think also about TVET and green skills. Right. So with this, our ministry's efforts concentrates on this, on education, and also looking at a socially just and environmentally friendly economy, following the principle of just transition to reach the SDGs. With this, I would stop on this question.
But it's very interesting what you're saying, and Minister, I want to get your thoughts on this. Dr. Kuhn says that we need climate resilient schools, of course, climate resilient teachers, but also climate resilient students. So I want to know what your government, the Pakistani government, is doing to strengthen the resilience of its education system to withstand these climate shocks that Pakistan has been facing.
Thank you very much. Again, the government of Pakistan is taking a number of actions to build the long-term resilience of education to climate shocks. In response to the floods, the government of Pakistan and the UN have created a recovery plan for Pakistan, the Resilient Recovery, Rehabilitation and Reconstruction Framework. The plan has raised over $9 billion from the international community to support Pakistan's recovery. It sets out key priorities for the education recovery from the floods, in particular the rebuilding of infrastructure and climate resilient schools short term, which she mentioned, Excellency, and recovering learning losses through remedial education. The government of Pakistan is discussing with all federating units to involve National Disaster Management Authority, where this is the authority which deals disastrous incidents, and provincial disaster management authorities, is to closely discuss and work with the education departments to frame a resilience plan for education sector to face climate change effects and shocks like future floods. In addition, the Ministry of Federal Education and Professional Training of Pakistan has helped to commission a new report towards a resilient education recovery from Pakistan's floods. With Malala Fund and the Pakistan Coalition for Education, this recommends recovery to learning losses and student retention rates from the severe disruption of education by focusing on the school levels. Ensure recovery fund investment are made in areas of education where they lost beyond any next climate shock. 5 further recommendations are made in the report include using existing infrastructure to be used to begin learning activities while rebuilding, institute learning targets at the district level, to rebuild quickly, enabling public and non-profit private sectors partnership, training teachers to deliver remedial learning, and technically and financially supporting head teachers to achieve remedial learning and develop a school disaster response plan. And we also include climate change, this subject, climate change subject in curriculum, which she mentioned. And you know, the loss by this flood is $760 million. But this UU pledges 60 million, and which 40% almost we received. But the other, still we are waiting for that.
Yeah,
the loss is great. Right. I tell you, I appeal the international community. The loss is $760 million. And the situation in Pakistan, you know, is a little bit difficult. But we feel for enhance the sport fund, and also this should be on quick and fast track basis. Because we need to rehabilitate the schools, infrastructure damaged by the floods, and children are suffering a lot.
Indeed.
And this is a pathetic condition in Pakistan, and we are taking all measures. Where she mentioned we're training to the teachers and rebuilding the schools, which is absorbing this climate change shocks, and also including this curriculum.
So
but,
all of that is important, but you need the money and you need it now.
Yes.
Okay. Let me bring you, Birgitte, to the conversation. You recently went to Mozambique and Ethiopia, I believe. Tell us about what you saw there in terms of the best practices that are being put in place to deal with the climate issue.
Thank you. Yes, and from both these visits, I saw how the climate changes are directly impacting children. But for me, it was very inspiring to see how children are actively empowered and using their voices to respond to these climate changes. For us as an organization, Save the Children, we are prioritizing climate and education in very many different ways. And in a country like Ethiopia, climate changes like drought and flood disrupt children's education in very many ways. So what we see is climate-induced migration, which is a key factor for children dropping out of school in the southern parts of Ethiopia due to 4 consecutive failed rain seasons. So addressing this topic is key to make sure children get back to school. And together with Education Cannot Wait, we focus on promotion of girls' enrollment. We ensure nutritious school meals, and not least, we work with children to increase their knowledge about climate change. We have to address climate change and the risk it poses to children, their communities, and the global education systems. So I really strongly welcome the change when it comes to climate change in Education Cannot Wait new strategy. And we as Save the Children really look forward to collaborate with DCW on climate and education.
All right, very good. Yoris, now you have in this room here today government representatives, ministers, you've got donors as well. What would you like to see from them in terms of key actions to uphold your right and children's right to education in the face of more frequent and intense extreme weather? What more would you like to see them do?
So first, thank you very much for the donors and the countries. Germany and also Norway is the biggest one who pledged to Education Cannot Wait yesterday. We have more than 800 million US dollar. So, but I want to emphasize that in my country, in Indonesia, we have more than 50 youth network and community who have been fighting through serial activities related to climate-related disasters. So, but we still face a lot of barriers and challenges. The first challenge is lack of funding. We don't have any access to find out more about how to access that kind of fundings. Okay. And the second thing is about the administration requirement. We also face the barriers about administration requirement because some company or like donors they require like a bunch of requirement that it's really hard to provide that kind of requirement. And the third is about the regeneration. Because of we can provide requirement and another, like the donors need. That means it will be caused that we can be more sustained. Mm-hmm. So here is my 3 key points, my call to action to the world leaders. First is to invest on climate resilient education. What is climate resilient education? In Indonesia, we have that kind of climate resilient education in our grassroots organization led by the youth and the grassroots communities. We call it resilient school. So resilient school is not only provide a good quality education related to climate disaster or like climate change, but also to provide good quality education for girls and also for those who are the most vulnerable one, including children and girls with disabilities. And the second thing is I want world leaders to think about what I'm going to say, about how to the young people, we can make the young people to more engaged and taking the leadership on the climate action. Because, as I mentioned before, that young people is, they don't inherit the future, but they own the present for the better future. Okay. And the third thing is, in my country, Indonesia, we have more than 45 million people. It is a huge number. Mm-hmm. It is a quarter of the population of Indonesia. So, let's work with young people Let's work with grassroots organizations. We need your help, and we need more collaboration.
All right,
Thank you.
great. Thank you so much, Yoris. Let's work with young people. And also, Dr. Kuhn, we heard from both Yoris and Birgitte prioritizing girls' education. And I want to ask you about that, the intersection between education, climate change, and gender equality to protect girls' education. How is your government addressing that?
Oh, in a strong way, I think.
Yeah.
I don't have to repeat what is said on the girls. And interestingly, you all know this, girls have a special interest in climate change. We have seen this from Sweden. Just think about Greta Thunberg and her movement, the Fridays for Future. It was a young girl, really young girl, telling leaders how maybe to change things. And therefore, and only therefore, our minister, you have seen her the last days, she follows a feminist development policy to promote gender equality in and through education. So girls' education is in our focus. This is for a long time, and it's not only in Germany's focus, you know this, others alluded to it, Canada, also a big contributor, or Great Britain, in their G7 presidencies, they had it, and so did we as Germany. In our G7 presidency recently in 2021, we did an initiative, the Support Her Education Initiative with Malala and GPE. And last year, in 2022, we launched a network, the Gender Transformative Education with UNGAI, the United Nations Girls' Education Initiative, to end harmful gender stereotypes. And we think with this, really this commitment of girls being one of the most vulnerable, but also children, also including boys, we have to tackle, we can tackle climate crisis challenges best.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for such a great discussion and for your recommendations. We're going to take some questions now. A round of applause, please, ladies and gentlemen, for our panelists here. Thank you so much. So we're going to take questions now from the floor and from those of you joining us online. I'd like to go to the floor first and to the representative of the UK, Judith Herbertson, whom I believe has a question. There you are.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm Judith Herbertson. I'm Head of Girls' Education at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK. Thank you to all the panellists, and particularly to Nafisa and Pedro. We've heard very positive noises from the United Arab Emirates and Dubai Cares that education will, for the first time, be a standalone pillar at COP28. I wonder how we can collectively make the most of this opportunity to deliver meaningful commitments on education as it relates to climate change and indeed environmental change, to deliver meaningful change on the ground for the children whose education is disrupted, and to then help ensure that education continues to be a feature at subsequent COPs. Thank you.
Who would like to take that question? You go for it. Okay, go for it, Birgitte.
I'll try to answer. Thank you very much for that question. It's a very important one. COP28, I think, is a landmark opportunity to really secure the commitments and investments and to strengthen education's role in the global climate response. And we have to integrate, I think, recommendations on education in existing COP negotiations rather than pursuing it separately. Child-sensitive climate finance, meaning that child rights, views and needs are considered in the finance and investments, are extremely important, I believe. And we will, together with Global Partnership of Education and the World Bank, we will publish a report on the relationship between climate change and education and financing, and this report will come out in April. And we are also very happy to support the upcoming Education in Emergency Hub flagship report on education and emergencies and climate change, which will be launched ahead of COP28, which will also provide lots of really important information addressing the question you were asked.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer, Birgitte, and we look forward to seeing climate really take a central role at COP28. Thank you. Now, I have a question here from one of our online viewers. And I'm going to put it to you, Dr. Kuhn, because as Germany is one of the donors here, the question is, what is Education Cannot Wait and the donors doing to engage in broader discussions on climate resilience?
Okay.
Yeah, I put you on the spot there, haven't I?
Yeah, no, but what we put it, I think we now, the strategic plan, it is in, the topic is in, we just, put it in there because we have seen the relevance, everybody has seen the relevance, and now we have to work on this together as all the donors, all the partners within the partnership, and with ECW, with the Secretariat, with Yasmin Sharif, with all her teams, to really to make follow the words of the strategic plan, the action. And I was also grateful for Judith's question. We have to combine forces and now work on this together to do this, what is requested from us, given the climate change situation we are facing and all the other crises. But we want to combine forces, I think, and look for solutions.
Great, thank you so much for that response. Now, Minister, I want to put this question to you, but I'll reframe it just a little bit because it's something important that you touched on in your speech. There's a question here from one of our online audience members. The question initially was, what are industrialized countries as great producers of pollutants doing? But I'm going to reverse it a little bit and say, what should industrialized countries as great producers of pollutants doing to support? What should they do to support the global climate crisis and its impact on global education, given that they're the culprits, if you will?
Thank you very, very much again. This is very, very important question. We are now discussing in our country because the contribution and emission of gases totally of our country is 1%. And we are suffering a lot because of this pollution and climate change. And the developed countries who are responsible for this catastrophe, this I think they should, first of all, they should shift their system to pollution, climate change free. That they should evolve a system. First of all, this is long term. And short term is that they should support all those countries who are suffering because of this, because this is not their fault. This is all because of developed and Western countries. So they should come forward and support, especially on priority, they should support in education sector. This is very, very important. And I think they will definitely consider this sympathetic appeal to the international community. They should come forward, and because we have gone through this flood, because we suffered a lot, and our children are out of school. They don't have the access to the schools, and there is even no schools and infrastructure of education system. So I again appeal to them, come forward and support Pakistan.
Thank you so much, Minister, for your response. Thank you. Now, yes, would you like to add something? Yes, go on.
Just a minute.
Yes.
So I think that we have to make sure that, every day we talk about fundings, but we have to make sure that the fundings go to the most affected one. And it will be nice and it will be great if we think about accountability and transparency. And then how can the grassroots organization can achieve that? And because in my country, in Indonesia, the three main things of our activities related to climate disaster is, first is about advocacy, and the second thing is about education, and third is action.
Right.
So we have to collaborate this together, because action without advocacy, and advocacy without education to educate the peer educator, because we have to make sure that young people can be the peer educator to another young people,
right,
so that they can create a movement together to achieve sustainable development goals.
Thank you so much, Yoris. That's very important to point out. And also on the issue of transparency, making sure the funds go to those who need it the most. Thank you all for a very great conversation. There are lots more questions, but unfortunately we can't get to all of them. Hopefully throughout the morning we'll be able to get more of your audience questions in, and also those of you watching us online. Once again, a big thank you to our speakers. A round of applause for them, please. And as we heard, we must include these young people who are directly affected in the conversation we're having today. As the Minister said, we need more funding, and now, not just promises of funding, but actually delivering the funding, and transparency, also very important. Thank you all very much for a very good conversation. Now, at this time, I'd like to invite a very special guest onto the stage to share her poetry and close our session on climate change. Farah is a climate and girls' education activist from Pakistan. She works as a youth activist leader with Transform Education at the United Nations Girls' Education Initiative. Please, a round of applause for Farah.
Four million girls, they say, are out of school due to climate change. 11 million girls may not return to school due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Statistic after statistic, and the number only increases. Dear world leaders, are you listening? We are not numbers. We are people. We are girls, and we are fighting. Girls who are fighting for the life of this planet and climate justice, demanding a future built by all of us. A future with an education system and curriculum that builds on social and climate justice and centers the foundations of gender equality. A pen in their hand, a book in their grasp, a mind that is free and a spirit that is unencumbered, a future that shines and a journey that is richer, a life that is full and a world that is better. Yet, still we fight against the odds, against the mindsets that see girls as only commodities, against the culture that holds us back, against the norms that block our track. Dear world leaders, no more. The forest is on fire. 11 million girls are out of school. The world is burning. You cannot ignore the smell of rubble. You cannot ignore the oppression of girls in emergencies. You cannot ignore the inequalities. You cannot ignore the prejudices at the root of education systems, curriculums, and practices. Dear world leaders, we want a future with an educational system that fosters climate justice and gender equality, and we will get it. Dear world leaders, try and stop us. Dear girls, the fight is long and the fight is hard, but together, in solidarity, we must remain strong. We must hold hands and break the chain. We must grab our futures with our bare hands. Let us use our voices and let us make them listen. Thank you.
Wow. What a powerful message to end this session with. Farah, thank you so much. Such brave young people, loud voices that want you to listen to them and that are not going to take no for an answer anymore. A round of applause once again for Farah. Amazing. Thank you so much. So that brings our session on climate change to a close this morning. Thank you very much. There are lots more things, great things happening throughout the day here at the conference center. Thank you once again to our distinguished panelists for taking part in this great conversation, to all of you joining us here in Geneva and those joining us online. Now I'm pleased to introduce the start of the series of parallel sessions which are going on this morning. At this time, which is about maybe 10 a.m. now, a little later, you can join any of the following 3 sessions. The impact of armed conflict on education will take place right here in plenary A. And then you have another session in plenary B, which is ensuring increased and better financing. And in plenary C, prioritizing support for teachers and teachers' well-being. So I hope you enjoy all the sessions this morning. I will see you back here on time, please, at 12:30 for the final part of day 2, the closing session. It's going to be very exciting and very interesting. You don't want to miss it, so be back here at 12:30. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of the sessions this morning. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our panelists once again. Thank you, Minister. Thank you.